Hello and welcome to TALRadio. At TAL, we connect those who are willing to give to those who are in need. My lovely listeners and my lovely audience, you're listening and watching to a wonderful series, Self-Coaching. And when I say that, you know very well who is going to be there in the studios. Well, let's welcome Andrew Tallent. Andrew is a self-coaching expert and he has coached thousands of CEOs across the globe. Not just CEOs, but leaders also. Andrew, welcome to TALRadio.
Hi, Sandy. It's great to be with you again.
Thank you so much. And this week, we would be focusing upon, key stakeholders in a relationship. So technically, the topic is understanding key stakeholders and building better relationship. And especially when we talk about relationship, we do not mean the personal ones, but certainly the professional setting. So let me start by asking you that, Andrew, why do so many leaders underestimate the importance of stakeholders' relationship?
We see this all the time with any leaders that you've come across. What they usually get measured on and what they get valued on is what they do and what they achieve in terms of goals. So they'll have goals written down, they'll have certain targets to meet, and therefore they focus on doing things. But both you and I know, Sandy, from previous episodes, that actually the only way we get those things done is if we can get people bought in to helping us to do that, because we can't do anything on our own. So the reason that stakeholder relationships, and a stakeholder relationship is anyone that's got a vested interest in you being successful or not in a professional sense, is absolutely critical for you to understand where exactly they are with you now in terms of supporting you or not, so you can get these things done. And most people don't, because it's hard work. It means we need to spend time in relationships. It means we have to think hard about who these stakeholders are. Sometimes we don't even know. And therefore, what today's topic is going to be about is how we explore that.
All right. So when we talk about understanding key stakeholders, but what I really would like to know, and I'm sure the audience is also pretty curious to know, who are we really talking about? Who are these key stakeholders?
So the best way to think about this is for you to live your daily goals, both professionally and personally, actually. Who is it that's interested enough to work out what you're doing, have a view on what you're doing, have a view on whether you're being successful or not, and has an interest and also a stake or influence upon it. So that's where the word stake comes from in terms of stakeholder. So it isn't just your team members that you lead and manage. It isn't just your customers who provide you with a business. It isn't just your suppliers who provide you with the products or the services in the first place for your customers. It isn't just your board directors that maybe have on the board. It's not even your investors. It's anybody in the whole value chain of whatever it is you do as a leader that has an interest in your success. Because if you're successful, they will be too. They will receive those positive benefits and services. So we've got to think about everyone. Literally, there are probably tens, if not hundreds, of stakeholders we have to think about when we're doing what we do each day.
It literally sounded that we have got so many good well-wishers around us. It's like we are successful and they're happy about our success.
Absolutely.
So moving on, what are some of the signs that a leader doesn't actually understand their stakeholders, but they feel that they really do, but technically they do not enough?
This is a really great area to explore. So one way we can test this is, let's say that I have something important to achieve tomorrow and it involves somebody else, let's say Elsie, and somebody says to me, "Oh, Andrew, so that thing that you're doing that involves Elsie, how does she feel about it?" And well, she's fine. She's absolutely fine. She'll be okay with it. I'm guessing. I don't really know. I've not really involved Elsie, the stakeholder. And therefore, what many leaders do when they miss this is they don't really take into account what the other person's views are and what their interests are. So the way we can remedy this is actually go and ask Elsie, how do you feel about me doing this particular thing that I'm doing that is going to be involving you? Can you give me some feedback in terms of what you think about it? And then we know. Now, they might tell us the truth or they might not tell us the truth, but at least we ask the question. So this is a key problem that people have. We just don't involve our stakeholders in the decision making.
I think that was a very wonderful example and technically very related, like in a day-to-day, everybody can relate to this example. So moving on, we talk so much about self-awareness. So how does self-awareness play into stakeholder management?
It's linked to the previous point in that if nobody points out to me that actually other stakeholders have a vested interest and I just continue achieving goals, and and I don't really know what people think around me. I don't really know what involvement they want to have or what involvement they don't want to have. It just means I become very, very focused and almost blindsided in terms of the goal itself. I don't think about other people. And that doesn't mean I'm not nice to people. It just means they're not at the utmost of my thoughts when I'm coming to make the decision. So what you tend to find in leaders is they're very focused on things and doing things. And when you ask them questions about how are the relationships you have around you, they just don't really know. They're not self-aware enough to know that there's a problem with a relationship. I remember working with a leader once where I said to them, so who's the person that can actually fire you from this job? And they said, well, it's David. And I said, okay, that's David. How often do you meet with David? Oh, once a year. Okay, so how do you know how David feels about the work that you're doing? Well, he's fine. He gets the results each week, and he's not bothered about it really. So I just said to him, you need to know and understand how David feels about you and the way you're achieving your results, not just the results. Because at the end of the day, if you don't know that, you're not going to know whether you're going to be successful or not. So we have to keep thinking about all the people around us.
That's almost like having a preconceived notion about somebody without even knowing them. I mean, knowing the stakeholders in this case.
Absolutely. We assume all the time, and we cannot assume.
True. And when we talk about stakeholders in a relationship, I'm sure it's just not us. It's a lot of people around us, a lot of people who surround us in a professional and personal life. So I just wanted to know that, when we talk about, if the empathy is involved here, so what role does empathy have in strengthening these relationships?
Well, there's a really great example with one of my clients today. I'm sure they won't mind me talking about this. This individual had to give some very difficult feedback to one of their direct reports in their team. And all he was going to do was actually tell this person directly the feedback. And so what we did as an exercise for half an hour was just put himself in that person's shoes just for half an hour about how they're feeling about things at the moment, what they're worried about, what they're anxious about, how they might be coming to the meeting. And just so he put himself in their shoes. And once he'd done that, it meant he could change his style of the way he was going to talk to that person because he suddenly understood what was important for them. What was important for them was to just have lots of space to be able to think and talk and listen as opposed to just being told the feedback. And so empathy is all about putting ourselves in other people's shoes, taking that into account before we do what we need to do in that relationship.
And I wish everybody in this world had that.
Absolutely.
So moving on, when we talk about leaders, so how can leaders build trust when there's been a kind of a conflict kind of a situation or like a broken communication or a miscommunication or a misunderstanding, you can say in this case?
This is very common. Everyone listening to this or watching this would have been in this position before. So the natural thing we do is almost act a bit like a child and say, well, I'm not going to speak to that person until they come and tell me that they're sorry or they want to build the trust again. And yet we'll be waiting a long time if that happens because human nature is.
True.
So what I have to do to build the trust, I need to be trusted by the other person. So that usually calls for one or two things. The first is I probably need to show some vulnerability with that person. We've talked about trust in a previous episode, where I either recognize that I was wrong and I say that, where I maybe show that I've got a bit of a weakness in there that I might not listen, but just demonstrate that I'm giving something where actually I know I've not been correct all the time. If I do that enough times, it helps to build the confidence and the trust with the other person for them to start sharing with us some of their vulnerabilities and what they're worried about. But we've got to make the first step. We cannot get people to trust us until we make those first steps of actually understanding what's important to them when they build trust. So vulnerability, saying I got it wrong, not just waiting for them to pick up the phone is usually the best way.
It was such a perfect example. I could not nod my head more than what I did. I'm so sorry to interrupt you there, with so many guesses because, it happens in everyone's life that we do expect the other persons to come and say sorry, and we really wait for a long time. And I'm sure all our listeners and, viewers would really agree to this. It happens on a day-to-day basis and nobody knows, but you answered it so beautifully today. Thank you so much for that. So moving on, you talk about self-coaching, Andrew. So how can leaders use self-coaching to navigate complex stakeholders dynamics?
So there's something that anybody can do, either on a piece of paper or using AI coaches, as we've discussed before, whatever is right for them. And all I want listeners and viewers to do is actually write down 5 or 6 names of people who are stakeholders for them. And that's all it needs. So it might be their boss, it might be a peer, it might be a direct report, it might be someone in a different function, but just to write five or six. And within that 5 or 6, have a variety. So some that you like, some you can't understand, some that you always have conflict with, some who maybe you are curious about. And once you've done that, just start to write down a few words about how you feel about the relationship right now. And more importantly, what do you think they would say about you if you were to ask them about how they feel about you in the relationship? So this is a really good starting point. We can use AI coaches to help us with this as well, which I do every day, to get us to reflect on these relationships, but also just writing down in a journal the words that come to us. That raising awareness just to those 5 or 6 key stakeholders will enable you to work out what's the next step you need to take in all of those relationships.
So whenever we talk about leaders, I really wanted to understand, how can a CEO or any leader, in this case, balance priorities between different stakeholders? Because, every situation is so different.
It is, and it's a really difficult one, this, because we all usually have one direct boss. Sometimes in matrix structures, we'll have maybe 2 bosses that are directing our workflow. But the way to do this is, again, to be very honest and build trust in relationships. Let's take the 5 or 6 we've just talked about. So if I've got those 5 or 6 that are giving me work or asking me to do work, what I need to understand is, what are they expecting from me? When do they need the work done? What quality do they need the work done? And how do they want our relationship to be as we do this? Once I understand all of those things rather than guess or assume, I can then go back to each one of them to say, well, look, David over there wants me to do this by next Friday, and yet you want me to do it by Tuesday. Is there any way we can actually change the schedule of this so that everybody gets what they need? And just be very honest and direct around that. That's the way to do it, to make sure you meet all the stakeholder expectations.
Wow, that's pretty important, especially when it comes to your work-life balance.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on, how do you approach a difficult stakeholder who resists collaboration or transparency, I must say in this case? It's like being true.
You're going to love my word. We've used this word before. The only way that ever works when we have a resistant stakeholder and we cannot break through, we cannot understand where they're coming from, even though we might not like it and we feel very negative about it because the resistance is. Within resistance, there's always intelligence. And so we need to be curious. We need to go to curiosity. Now, that isn't about asking somebody why, because we both know, and the audience knows, when we ask someone why, it evokes a defensive response. It makes us defensive when somebody asks us why, because it's a justification question. So all we should do is, once we hear the resistance and we're feeling it and we're not sure where it is, just use the questions what, how, when, who. And if you can use those kinds of opening words to understand where they're coming from, it's usually something that's a problem with them rather than you, and you understand that better. So within resistance, there's intelligence. Just be curious about it, ask the right question, and you will find out how to move forward.
Like, as they say, the 5 W's of journalism is like who, what, where, why, when.
That's the one. They're the ones.
True. So moving on, whenever we talk about leader, there's certainly a power associated with it. So, how does power dynamics, influence stakeholders' relationship, and how can leaders manage that in the most, I would say, cordial manner?
There are 2 aspects to power. So there's authoritative power, where I have a hold over you because of my level of authority or my role. And then there's influential power. Now, authoritative power, let's say we're in a relationship and I use that kind of power in a stakeholder relationship without vesting time, usually means that you feel some kind of resistance to that, because nobody likes to be told what to do, in the sense of, you must do it this way. They like to be given direction, but not told how to do it. If we think about influential power, the way that feels is very different, because when we have influential power in a relationship, it means the other person in the relationship has vested time in understanding the best way to influence you. And therefore, they don't tell you how to do something or what to do. They ask the question, well, this is what we've got to do, Sandy. How would you like to do it? And what's the best way you think we can do it? So that's an influential power where we work in partnership with the stakeholder to get to the same result, rather than me just telling you and telling you how to do it. So both powers have relevance. It depends on the organizational structure and the culture. It's always better to try and work on the latter, because that usually has the better long-term results.
It sounds so amazing, when you say that, the leader should be asking, and, especially when you call out my name, Sandy, and I'm like, really, is he asking me? So lovely. So moving on, whenever we talk about self-coaching, the only person that I can connect with is you. So with respect to you, what's one framework or model you personally use to map and prioritize stakeholders effectively?
Well, if people read my book or go onto the website, they'll find something called stakeholder mapping. And this is a very, very simple technique where it's a diagram technique. So we draw. I'm going to give you an example. At the center of the diagram is me. I put my initials of AT in a little circle. And then I put on the stakeholder map, a piece of paper, just another name of a stakeholder that comes to me. And let's say it's you, Sandy. So Sandy goes up here. And the way I actually map this thing out is if I've got Sandy up here on the map, to the top right-hand side of the map, the closer they are to me on the map, then it means we have a good relationship. The further away they are from me on the map means we don't have a good relationship. And you can build this map up with every single stakeholder around you or in a circle to actually see where the relationships are very strong and where they are not so strong, which means for the ones that are not so strong, you have to make a decision. Do I need to improve them? And if I do, it means I need to start building trust and invest time in the relationship. So that's the one technique, which again, you can do on a computer if you want, on your iPad or just on a piece of paper, to go through this particular exercise, just to really raise awareness about where my stakeholders are right now. You can do this personally as well, in terms of my partner, my family, and it's really eye-opening, actually, just to see where you need to invest time. And you may have a very close relationship with a sister or brother, but actually not have spent much time with them recently, and therefore you feel as though maybe they're a bit further out than they should be. So that's really one great technique which people can read about online as well.
Lovely. So moving on, whenever we talk about stakeholders and relationship, do you really feel that it really contributes to long-term business success also, the kind of relationship that you have with your stakeholders, I mean, the leader especially?
Yeah, it does. And what I found over time working with many different leaders is if we can actually engage with all of our stakeholders, and therefore we understand there are no surprises because we understand what it is they expect from us. We can't always deliver what they expect from us, but what we can do is understand what that is. We've got a far better way of actually engaging them all in what we're trying to do because they understand what it is we're trying to do. They're probably going to give us a bit more leeway if we start to falter a little bit because we've got a good relationship. And whether that's in the supply chain or whether it's in the business itself, it just means we've got more chance to succeed because we've got more people understanding and want us to do it. People who do this on their own, of which there are many leaders, by the way, who do this on their own, can be successful in the short term, maybe for 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. But actually to be successful in the long term, it's very difficult if you're not engaging your stakeholders.
So, it's not, first of all, it is not a very easy thing to get all stakeholders, conclude to one point or one decision. So could you share a story where understanding a key stakeholder completely changed an outcome?
It did. I was working with a leader once in a manufacturing company, which is based all over the world. And he was very interested about his relationships with his stakeholders because he didn't really know how he was viewed in the company. He felt as though he was good at what he did, but he wanted to understand whether he had a future in the company because of the support that he had from various sponsors. So he did the stakeholder mapping exercise, which I've just described to you, and he was an engineer, so he did a very complex one, which had lots of colors in, and it worked for him. But what he worked out was the key relationship from that exercise was his boss. And what he worked out was that within his relationship with his boss, for him to be more successful and get the opportunities that he wanted going forward, he needed to be more assertive with his boss in meetings. And so over the next 6 months, he was more assertive with his boss in meetings. And what resulted from that was him getting a posting out in Singapore, from where he was based in the UK, because he made it clear about what was important to him. But he only could do that because he had understood that actually the strength of the stakeholder sentiment in the business was not where it needed to be prior to him to making the investment in the relationship.
That's fantastic. I mean, especially somebody to conclude to that way that I can be assertive and still, can have an influence. That is a wonderful outcome, I must say.
Yeah.
So moving on, what advice would you give to leaders who are new to organization and they're just starting out?
There's a tendency when we're new in an organization, particularly if we're going into a role that currently exists, and a lot of roles do exist. We've got the job specification, we're told what we need to achieve. A big temptation just to go into the rhythm of the previous person in the role. So we go to the same meetings they used to go to. We have the same administration support. We go to the same kinds of influential stakeholders. What we don't always do is spend the first 60, 90 days just really listening to all our stakeholders. So for example, what I've advised many leaders to do on the first 30 days of going in to an organization is work out who the key influencers are that help them to do their job all over the organization and ask them 3 questions, which we've covered before. The first is, how do you feel about my appointment into the business? How is it going to add value to you? What are you worried about? Second question, what are you expecting from me in my role in the next 6 months? Again, really being very clear. And then thirdly, what do you need from me in the way that we actually interact with each other in relationship going forward over the next 6 months? And if you ask that question of every single stakeholder that you can come across in the first 30, 60 days and listen and engage and don't commit to giving people anything at this point, just assimilate all the information, that's going to be the best way that any new person, as well as doing their day job, which we have to do our tasks, can actually make the biggest impact because you're planning for the future as opposed to trying to catch up once you've been in the role for 3 months.
That's a great advice, honestly. And I'm sure it's just not for the people at the senior level, but probably, at the mid-manager level or even at the entry level also, it might really work.
Everyone.
Thanks a lot for that. Talking to you is always very educational, Andrew. I must say that. So moving on, how does culture, like national or at an organizational level, affect the way leaders build relationships?
It does. So it's very interesting at the moment. I'm doing a lot of work trying to convince various leaders to engage in self-coaching AI tools, which I work with. And you see very quickly 2 different kinds of culture. So the first kind of culture is very much, it's about how much you can do in a day, how many tasks you can get through. It's not about relationships. And again, they tend to be short-term success stories. The ones that we all know around the world that have been very successful, doesn't matter whether it's Apple or Google, all the brands that we all know there that have been there for a long time. The ones that demonstrate there is about the culture of having this long-term approach to relationships, which means that you have to take time out from what you're doing each day to spend time in the canteen, to spend time in meetings with people to build relationships. So you have 2 distinct cultures. It's very difficult to try and build stakeholder relationships in the first kind of culture because people see it as a waste of time. Whereas in the second culture, it's welcomed, it's embraced, and therefore it's a lot easier if you're on the day one coming into the business to be able to do that. So to test the culture initially, ask those questions about what's important to your manager to then understand where the culture is right now.
And talking about culture, believe it or not, when you use the word canteen, it really shifted. It really gave me the nostalgic feel because the culture has really shifted. It's not canteen, it's cafeteria nowadays,
it is,
right?
I'm showing my age, Sandy.
No, that's what I'm saying. I belong to the same age, and that's what I remember. Canteen used to be the thing, and now it's cafeteria everywhere. Miss those days. So on that wonderful note, I'm not going to, stop you here for a very long time. But before I let you go, just one last question that I would really like to wrap up this segment with is, what's one practical step a leader could take today, as of now, to strengthen a key relationship?
I would think this is going to be quite hard for some people, but it really will add value. Think about the relationship at the moment that you don't really want to spend any time in, but you need to because you need their support to do what you need to do. Identify that person and actually just arrange a coffee or a walk with them and do what we talked about before about being curious, go with the resistance and ask those questions. How are you feeling? What you're expecting? What do you need? And you will make a breakthrough.
Lovely. So it's time for me to make a breakthrough at the moment and time for me to wrap up this wonderful segment in this wonderful series called Self-Coaching. So we'll be back next week with another interesting topic. Till then, please take very good care of yourself and keep on listening to TALRadio.